Good.
Kick off. Hello, Larry.
Hello, Mig. How you doing, man?
Not bad, buddy. Not bad. Good to finally do this. This is many years in the making. We've had
It
many.
surely is.
Yeah, I think we've had many a conversation that should have been a podcast in the past. So we're finally committing. Hi, I'm Mig. One of the curators at TartariaBritannica.com. I'll let you say who you are.
Yeah, no, I guess I was saying that in my last interview, kind of with how I ended up on Telegram, how I ended up bumping into you on Telegram. We got talking, and that's how the channel got started. You were like, you asked too many questions, just start your own. And that's where it went. And then we met up in London, and I guess the time just went by so quickly. We must have been there talking away for at least 3 hours or longer. And we were just saying to each other, like, the amount of topics we were going into, it was a shame there was nobody listening. Well, anybody close to us probably would have just thought we were crazy. And,
we were sitting outside Bank Station, and I think the crowd around us probably wouldn't have understood what we were talking about. I do remember nearly getting frostbite on that day as well.
Yeah. That's why we needed the hot chocolates.
Yeah, I enjoyed that day immensely, and I've always been against social media and all the sort of the internet. It's all bad and all the rest of it. But then I've met the likes of yourself, and I've had to go back in my box on a lot of thoughts there about it. It does connect people in the right way.
Yeah, that's so true. It's really interesting. You build up all of these notions and thoughts of people, just in the online world. And then when you actually meet up with them, it'll be like, oh, he's just a normal bloke.
Yeah.
And like me. And then that's such a great thing to resonate with. And you can go from anywhere with that, But there's obviously some I probably wouldn't like to meet face to face in the real world from the social media. But definitely glad we bumped together. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. Well, I think Telegram for me has been a new world. I mean, a lot of the social media I didn't get on with, but Telegram seems to be a more open-minded crowd. You tend to. There's a lot of crazy people on there, but you tend to meet some really good people, and instantly we had a lot to share, and I think it was a crime not to share it on the day.
Yeah, it kind of was, but you know what? We're here now, and we're getting it done. And I guess seeing as we both have Tartarian channels, so to say, and we have gone into so many posts on that. I've done some really interesting posts. You've done some great posts, gone through onto your website. I've seen you've got some great articles. You've really done a lot of solid work and great research, and it's really appreciated. And it's great to be able to go to a place where all of that is well put together, and you can kind of go through and sift through all the different categories and timelines, and come to your own conclusions as well. But like you, I guess Tartaria was one of these things that we ended up seeing a lot of it all of a sudden. Well, I think I'd first come across it in 2013, and with the mud floods and that, and then started, and you came across it, I'm sure, quite early too, and then started to revisit it again. It kind of got a new audience or uptake where people were very interested in this. And but what's your take and on the whole Tartaria, on what it is? What do you think? What's your idea?
Well, it's Tartaria for me is it's initially a gateway. It's an area of our history that has definitely been lost in the translation into what you learn at school and what the mainstream, if you like, accepts as the historical record. For me, when I've always been interested in maps since I was quite young, and having exposure to different maps over time just gives you an idea of where things are and what they are. And I remember at school you learn about a certain chunk of history, and then there's this sort of grey area. And then as I got older, I started to notice the architecture around me. And as I became more able to do different things, you start to appreciate the work that was done before. And in certain buildings, living in London, they take your breath away in how beautiful they are, how ornate they are, and those questions of where am I, who built this, and when, started to really sort of bubble away in me. And then I started to go back looking at the maps and little chunks of history, and then there was a few revelations that sort of hit me that I haven't been told the truth. There are things in evidence around me everywhere that don't fit this narrative that we've been fed. To be honest with you, living in that narrative is a nice, secure, safe feeling that you know all that is. When you actually take a step out of it and start asking questions of, well, how did we get here, and what's the true history? And we're told that we've been a realm that's been at war since mankind started walking. But then you look around, certainly in London, and London is a small example of any city you can go to in the world, including places up mountains in the middle of Colombia, and find breathtaking architecture that cannot be built during a war. If you're in the middle of fighting this person and that person, a lot of people don't realize that to produce fantastic architecture, it starts way back. It starts with agriculture. You need to have a constant food supply just to feed builders that are going to build. And then you need the logistics, you need global cooperation. If you're looking at things in Venice that have got marble imported from Syria or other places, then all of a sudden you think, well, it couldn't have been that bad of a war if you're able to import tons of delicate rock, if you like, across a continent. So you start asking more and more questions, and then Tartaria eventually surfaces as one of the big smoking guns in history that has been, I'll say, lost, but maybe hidden, or worse, lost to us. And when you find Tartaria, it is something solid that you can actually, it's a tangible thing from history that you can say, right, this has definitely been lost. There's definitely lots of interest here. And from that point onwards, you can start understanding history a little better. For me, certainly, when I sort of come to the conclusions I've come to, the world around me changed. I suddenly walked out, and buildings that have been there forever took on a new lease of life to me. And it's almost like living in a new area or having a new street to go down. It was a lovely thing. Although 90% of the population will think you're mad. So, I suppose we'll go into what Tartaria itself was, but that's my sort of journey into Tartaria, if that makes sense. I went off on a complete monologue. Apologies there.
No, you're great. What was the name of that? You were talking about that site in South America. What was Lost something? What was the name of it?
That was Las Lacas, and I've produced an article on Las Lacas just because of the fascination it gave me. It's if you're going to take a journey into Tartaria, it's a great one to start at, and so it's going from memory here. It's a European style large church cathedral sort of structure. It's positioned on a ravine, a very steep ravine, 4,000 meters up in the Colombian Andes. and it's got a backstory to it. The backstory becomes more and more fantastic the more you go into it. The mainstream will tell you that there's three buildings that have been built on top of each other. Although when you look at it from an architectural point of view, it looks very much like it was designed as one piece and is one structure. I think there's lots of stuff about the building as well that I didn't cover in the article that sort of popped up about. There was a boathouse, there was a lift, there was all this tech that surrounded the building. But it's interesting because it was apparently built by locals. And in the time that it was built, I'm pretty sure that they didn't have the flute, the violin, the oboe, and the entire sort of Western European sort of orchestra equipment, which each one's got an angel as you walk into the building holding a different one of these instruments.
Wow.
Which no one thinks is out of place in the middle of.
That's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
The fascinating thing about that was it was the whole building is built around a rock that they actually cover up now if anybody goes to see it. And the rock is a depiction of Our Lady holding a child, but apparently it's like a stick of rock. It goes through the mountain, penetrates, and sort of you question how it could have been made if that's the genuine thing. But to build a building around it is quite an impressive thing. But the entire building as well is sort of Gothic architecture, and that's a great way, a great building that stands out. You know, without the backstory, can't make up for the building itself, which would have taken 10,000 people to build, plus the logistics of getting the stone, which was 50 miles away downriver. Sort of.
Yeah. So basically, I remember I looked into it a bit too as well. There were no railway lines, there were no roads, right? It is quite interesting. And then, how many people lived in the local vicinity?
I think there was, I can't remember offhand, but there was about 10,000 or something, about 8,000 or something local inhabitants who were sort of village people. They wouldn't have had, I mean, and they weren't living in European style masonry buildings, you know, 2 ups, 2 downs, that sort of thing. They were living the expected life for an 1800s Colombian inhabitants. So how they built the church, where the knowledge came from to do it, where the architectural plans from it are, who knows? It's a bit of a question mark.
Yes, I believe if you Google it, it gives you a completely different date. I believe they give off 3 or 4 different construction dates, but when you Google it, you only see one date. Is it 1902 or something like that?
That's it.
And it's quite interesting. So that's clear enough that they're already lying about, because you have to do deep research to actually find those other construction dates that they mention, which is quite interesting.
It's a neo-Gothic structure in the middle of Colombia, and I mean that could be anywhere in Europe.
Yeah, just the whole narrative doesn't add up, does it?
It doesn't, and it's but yeah. So that's that's Las Lacas, which again, it's fascinating. I mean, what's your take on it all?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from what you explained, it's quite similar. You know, you come across new information, and you come across different evidence that really gives you a new look. Like you said, it felt like you were in a brand new city again, because you were kind of re-looking at everything again. It all became quite more interesting and deeper meaning to it. And I think it was similar for me, the way I got into, Tartaria as well. It wasn't just Tartaria; it was everything, uncovering everything, and that just happened to be one aspect of it. I guess, seeing as we're talking about like Tartaria now, my understanding of it was that there was a clear erosion of Tartaria from the history books, and it seemed very strange how it all just vanished all of a sudden. And now when we look at those regions in like maps of today, and that it's replaced with like Russia and China and these things. And there's just far too many maps going back, showing Tartaria, done by many different cartographers. But also, what's interesting, it's not just the land, it's not just the name Tartaria or the Tartars or people, it's everything that changed. Even north of Russia today, you call it the Arctic Sea, right? But in all the old maps, it was the Tartarian Sea, or it was called the Tartarian Ocean. You see it in all these old maps. So
Yeah.
not just the land names changed, the names of the sea, oceans, and everything like that also altered over time. And it definitely became something that needed to be questioned more. How could this be mentioned so commonly for, centuries and centuries, and all of a sudden just stop? Nobody's ever going to hear about this again. It's been erased. So if you're not going to include it into any recent history books, then nobody will know about it. And that's the way you control any narrative, isn't it? To do with our history is, if you control the past, you control the present and where the future is going to. So if we don't know where we come from, it's hard to know where we're going. So it's definitely given a new way to really re-examine everything, not just for Tartaria, for also all over the world. There was many different ancient empires. There were many different, types of cultures throughout, but especially with Tartaria, it was on such a scale, like landmass wise, it was so massive. It's actually the biggest empire to ever exist in history. And if you look at all of those countries and the people bordering this massive empire, of course, that's going to have some type of impact on your culture and your way of life. You will, the way I look at it was that the reasoning why you had similarities in architecture and things like that around the world is because the Tartarian Empire was on pretty much everyone's doorstep. So you were going to have, free and open trade in knowledge, in health, in architecture, in mathematics, in, science, and whatever it is, and that's what it looks like to me, why we see all these similarities. And even like, some of them might not have been in full connection, but they've taken that influence from it, and it's definitely interesting. But even in North America, there's old maps where they talk, they've used the word like Tartars, and they represent that as more of a type of barbaric type of individuals, when in reality they weren't really, it wasn't really like that. It was more a way of tarring them with the same brush, like, the phrase goes. What do you think about that?
There's an old expression of "you caught a Tartar," which is you've caught something bad and effectively. But it's very interesting how they've done it. I mean, if you initially, like, when you start looking at Tartarian history, there is still a Tartar that exists in eastern Russia. There are still a Tartar people, although they're nomadic horsemen that live in yurts and this sort of thing. So there's still this, there's this little pocket that you could still reference back to Tartar, this sort of stuff. But I think Tartaria, when you start looking back, for me, what jumps out is that firstly, our understanding of our realm was very different in the years gone by, and the way we place geography was quite different, and there's a lot of cartographers and there's a lot of stuff on the internet that will tell you that Tartaria was just a blanket term for land, which in a way in a way has some truth in it, because Tartary is the realm we're in. The tar is the land we stand upon. There's still French references to it, pomme de terre and things like this. We're terra, and it's a land-based thing. Now, if the people that came before, and I'll say that the people that came before, because that could be closer to the truth than just an expression. But if the people that came before had a different impression of their environment, they lived in a realm. There was a realm above and a realm below, if you like, and that realm that they existed in was Tartary, and all land would have been land or Tartary in effect before the many divisions started pulling in. And if you track Tartaria on maps, as you say, it starts off as everywhere. And from a cartographer's point of view, you could argue that yes, they've put a blanket term on the land, although that it's a very detailed representation of the land in a lot of these maps as well. So they must have known quite well the land. And then as time goes on, this culture, understanding, peoples, if you like, gets divided into many different aspects of Tartary or Tartaria. And as you said, that an empire rises up as a Tartarian empire. A Chinese Tartarian empire rises up and falls back. China seems to have always been China. Hindustan always seems to have been Hindustan as far as you go back, or India as it is now. But the mass above that has been has changed and morphed so many times, certainly since the 1500s, and during the 1800s to 1830s, it had its most dramatic reshuffle, if you like. But there's an argument to say that we've discussed Scythia before.
Yes,
and Scythia was, if you imagine that the north was a central reference, and then in the regions expanding from the north, you would have a cold area, which would have been the Scythian region, which again gets bigger and larger depending on the climate. And then you had the tropics. And so Scythia would have started as a reference, but then became a culture and became its own empire in effect, which then became Tartaria, and then flipped back a few times and had independence and that sort of stuff. And it's my argument to the cartographers is that if Tartary is a landmass and purely as a reference as a landmass, why do you have independent Tartary? Why do you have greater Tartary? Why would you need these divisions of just the landmass? And, why do you have Tartar? There are books that document people meeting with Tartarians, so they have to have existed. They have to have spanned multiple cultures. Now, one part of Tartaria would have been Chinese, or that type of mindset, if you like. And then and the larger part of Tartaria that everybody sort of immediately goes to was obviously the Russian space or the Rus space. And that infiltration of Tartaria becoming Russia, and Russia inheriting a lot of the infrastructure and technology that Tartaria had. Again, you see this sort of change. So Tartaria was definitely a thing. I'm gonna get this out, because this is just, I think a lot of people go on the internet and it's very easy to sort of look at pictures and see things and question, what validity or how real it is. And just opening the frames, but this is an original 1544 map. Probably can't read it very well, but it's got
Tartaria, wow, yeah, I see it there. Yeah.
Scythia. This is the actual thing. This has come from a book. I mean, how this paper is in such good condition from 1544. I only hope I can keep it in
Wow.
good condition. But
Wow, that's original.
yeah, this for me, this is the smoking gun. This map, because it's also, I don't know if you can see on there, it's got a Hyperborea.
Oh yeah, I see it. I see
So
it. Yeah.
Hyperborea, as you know, is a mythical land,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's on a map here. Whether this was the actual Hyperborea or, you know, a settlement of Hyperboreans that landed here, but it says on there Tartaria Olim Scythia, which is really critical, and we get a lot of maps that are Scythian and Tartarian. There's a lot of arguments, and I think a lot of people are quite passionate about their views on the Tartarian and Scythian thing. But Olim simply means former, or as in Latin, it's Old Latin, it would have meant once upon a time. So Tartaria, Olim, Scythia, Tartaria, once upon a time, Scythia. So that things like that date back to the 1500s means that there's proof that it existed. It's proof that it was a somewhere, and it's proof that something's wrong with our historical references. For it not to be in the mainstream, something that's accepted. I think people run away with a lot of the hyper focusing on all the different aspects of Tartaria, but sort of in a global thing, it should be a key that unlocks a lot of lost history to people, and a lot of understanding that we might not have been in the Dark Ages, as they were called. They might have been quite a busy time, but the information's been taken away, so it looks dark. Because if you don't have information from the time, it looks like nothing happened. But we're told we were living in mud huts and it was a very harsh time. But you know, how many castles are there and medieval buildings that disprove that theory completely? And some of them very well ordained inside with gold and fine linens, and you know, none of it makes sense from what we've been told. There you go. So yes, that's a little my 2 bit on Tartaria and.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And everything what you said, especially that I think it's been morphed into, well, it had been into quite a few different sections or even groups over time, and it's definitely changed so much. But there's a lot of evidence still there, you know, and it's always pointing back to it. Even there was an interesting document came across the other day, and it was an old document and it was the showing the genealogy of it said at the top genealogy of the ancient emperors of Tartaria, and then it had all the generations going back. But this is through Genghis Khan as well. But this is how they referred to themselves. Even from these documents, like they talk about them as being emperors of Tartaria, and you know, and then also it's quite interesting the whole story with him, and then you have so many accounts, even though there's Persian accounts and you know, and different leaders who have met him, who are, you know, written documented him to have like green eyes and red hair and all of these things. So. And then when we Google him today, we get completely different images. So the whole thing has been really uplifted and thrown out. Like even today, if you go to places in Kazakhstan or you go to even places in Mongolia, you can find people with those traits, you know. So it's not actually that even wild of a theory. But it's definitely interesting how they've actually cemented that whole thing with the Mongols. You know, the same thing with what they've done with the Vikings. They're just all barbaric. They don't, you know, they're just going around to basically pillage everywhere. And it's then we find out more information. Like even there was that Viking sword, which was found loads of other things as well, where it had all these different metals in it at the time when, you know, I can't remember exactly, but they weren't at that period supposedly in the Iron Age or whatever it was, that where they were sophisticated enough to create these multitude of metals out of one sword. So yeah, you'd always question that, and then it's kind of the same thing, I guess, again with the Vikings, and everything gets thrown into the mythology basket, and it's an easy way to ignore a whole group of people that existed for a very long time. And it's the same way with the Tartarians, and it's just if you blanket for long enough, people will just move on and forget about it, but it's definitely important that people like yourself, even like that map you showed out of that book, like that's that's real evidence and research to come across. And it is, and the problem is these days as well, especially when you're researching with this topic, you can be led down a lot of rabbit holes. And even just me and you talking about the maps and all these things, like, people could say, like, it definitely was a place that existed. There's too many references. It just, we can't even compile all of the documents and everything that has mentioned Tartaria, talked about it, and there's too much of it, nearly. So how could there be all of this, and then all of a sudden, no, this was just a blank term, as you said, like before, like, no, it's not what people thought it was, but clearly there's more to it.
Well, I think, yeah, it's everything, and I mean, it was an empire, and it was a nation, and it was all these things, and you can look at that. But I think the further you go back, the nation and the empire came from an understanding of where they were, and I think that meaning through the years, I mean, only takes a couple of generations to lose all knowledge, as we're finding out right now. So I think it's definitely, it's funny you say about the White Rabbit. I said this the other day. It's like there's so many people following this White Rabbit down this endless rabbit hole, and anything you look at in history in depth is a rabbit hole, and you can keep falling down. And I could sort of keep saying to people, start riding the Griffin, because at least that will take you back somewhere that you can land in a location and start from there. It's not just an endless hole you're going to fall down to. You'll eventually hit a map of Tartaria, and your journey begins. And from there, you can start uncovering the untruths that may have been layered over a lot of the history. And I think as well, I mean, one aspect of people I think gets their attention about Tartaria is the technology, or the potential knowledge we've lost in terms of how things function and what these old buildings were. And I'm completely convinced that most of these buildings were built with a hell of a lot of purpose and a hell of a lot of function involved in them, whether it be their alignment with their environments, or a lot of these big structures, they're aligned exactly east to west. They're aligned to some sort of star configuration. They all had huge bells housed in them, which I think is another massive thing. They all had metal on the top. They all had signs of modern technology, in my opinion, although looks different to sort of what we hold in our hands today. And then as you go through the Tartarian sort of dive, you find that technology which we think is new today was in existence not that many years ago. Like some of the telecommunications stuff we do and things like this, and even video calling, isn't in our far too distant history. How far back do these technologies go is another question, and were they built into the fabric of the environment, that sort of stuff. So I think that's another aspect of Tartaria that goes.
Sure, yeah. That's interesting, yeah, man. And do you think that the technology back then that they were using and compared to now, would you look on that as like they were more in line with a natural type of technology, and we're a bit more disconnected and we have like an unnatural types of technology?
100%. I think everybody's familiar with the Tesla expression, understand the world by frequency, sound, and vibration, and you understand the universe or something like that. And even the word universe, people forget what that means. It's a single vibration. A verse is a song or a sound, and a uni means one. So we all live within this one vibration. And I think an understanding of that, which we have now gone full circle, and modern science, if you want to call it that, starting to re-understanding this importance of using frequencies. But I mean, I think some of the tester experiments that he did, he was able to beam power over a 14-mile distance, and light a field of light bulbs up or something. There was this experiment he did, and so in terms of how we perceive tech, I think is the first thing. And the second thing is how we perceive power and power generation. You know, there's many different forms of even electricity, different states of electricity, and different ways that you can harness power. And we use one system at the moment. There, in my opinion, there were other systems clearly in play. And the more you sort of, I don't know how much time we'll go in, you know, to go into all of that now, but it's yeah, I think it's a really interesting aspect of the whole thing, that we've lost a lot of tech, even within the steam power tech that we had. You don't have to go to some of the far reaching sort of you know, sort of stuff that really sort of challenges your mind, but just in terms of the steampunk and things like that, what we were able to achieve. And if you look at clockmaking, watchmaking, back in the day, it was, you know, for me, that's real tech, and that's real, you know, reaching the top of your game. I mean, there's I don't know if you've ever seen it, the Silver Swan that's up in York, is a fantastic relic from the past, which is a solid silver swan that eats, drinks, sits within a bed of water, and it's a clock, and it's all made out of clockwork and all the rest of it. It's sort of like, well, how do we achieve this, you know, so where did this tech come from? Because you see little bits of tech at the end of it, like the Hindenburgs and things like that, but before this would have been a lot of tech, you know. And you know, the Tartaria influence, if you like, carried on well into the mid 1800s, as it being its own entity, although I think it was fighting its demise at that point. But a lot of this ingenuity came from that region and came from Tartaria. There's another thing as well that you know, the America, and you said about buildings that have been found in America and things like that. It's called the New World, which I always find quite interesting. When the media gives you something to chew on, I always think, well, yeah, could it be the absolute opposite? You know, could they have spun this on its head? And there's arguments to say that America was very much an old world, and was very much there, maybe before some of the things that we think predated America. So
yeah,
I throw that out there. Yeah.
Definitely. I think that's definitely clear. I did actually a good video on that on my channel, where I think I called it Civilizations of America Before It Was Colonized, something like that.
I think I saw it, yeah.
Went into a lot of different kingdoms that were already there previously. And a lot of them quite interesting, where the Wild West would have been. And that's funny because that was the last place they ended up taking over. But even more so, like places like Norumbega that were major settlements. And today that's just thrown in the myth basket. But it was clear as day that it was a real place. And now it's New England today, basically. So yeah, you're right. It's kind of everywhere. I don't know, is there any new world or new land even? Everything's old. Everything's already been done and gone, and we're already repeating the process poorly or trying to figure it out again.
Well, I think exactly, yeah. It's a repeating cycle, although I think there's this situation where the game gets reset, maybe for good reason, because people rise to power every so often that might not warrant the power. And I think the game keeps reset. But there used to be maybe some systems in place for humanity to deal with these resets. I think now they get abused, and our history gets wiped. We start again for fresh, thinking that everything's new. And I think, like, if you look at, we were talking about America and how old America might be. If you look at the earliest pictures of San Francisco, which I know that you've done, it's been on your channel many times, but the earliest pictures of San Francisco, we've got desolate streets, we've got an entire city laid out, we've got mud everywhere. That city has clearly been there a very long time. Even the size of the city, which, I think if you go back to the earliest pictures of San Francisco, I can't remember exactly, but it was a very small population for an absolutely vast city. Cities are born over need, if you like, where more people come into them, build more structures, and they build up to house more and more people. Other than China in modern days, it's unlikely that you're going to go and build a city ready for inhabitants to fill it. It's something that would be designed around the need of the people. So for there to be so many cities in existence in America, if you go around most of the capital buildings of America, which long ago I began an article on, it's still going. I just found it so fascinating that the architecture that's there, and you can compare that to any capital building around the world. Whether you go to, most of them, things in ancient Rome, which we can see in still there in Rome, are very, very similar, if not identical, to structures you have in America. So it proves to me that the timeline of America has been maybe forcibly subdued, and we think we've recolonized something that maybe we were already in. Maybe we got removed from the land for whatever reason, but certainly not new. And there were a lot of people in America still doing very, very well for themselves, as the different tribes. And if you look back, there are actual I can't remember what it was, but there was alliances and agreements made with the indigenous people when the settlers first came in, and it's sort of like these aren't barbaric nomads running around if you're having these types of agreements sewn up and all the rest of it. But it's I find America a really interesting.
But they also believed that they couldn't own the land, wasn't it?
This was it. Yeah.
So I think they even made agreements with them where they were like, they've made up an agreement to buy this land off them, and they're like, okay, we'll take your money, but okay, you believe you own it, whatever. But then it actually does come into existence later on, and they do officially own it.
Well, the concept for a lot of people in America was, I mean, especially the tribal guys who moved with the herds of buffalo and things like that. The concept of owning land for those tribes would have been completely bizarre, because it was,
yes,
it's still a bizarre concept even in my mind, to own a piece of land. I mean, we're only here for a very short period of time, and it doesn't feel right. Although, we need to occupy land. This is another aspect.
That's true. It's very true. But also, it's changed so much. If you did own land, then you owned it. Today, you don't own your land. You can't decide what you want to build on it. There's rules, regulations. There's everything. So you don't really
tell someone if you dig a hole these days, haven't you?
That's it. That's it. But it was interesting what you were saying before. What did you say? Flying the Griffin, was it?
Ride the Griffin.
Ride the Griffin. Yeah. So, like, it's a great way to put it, because people, if you do send people off somewhere to go on research down certain topics or whatever, you will get sent down the rabbit hole, and it's confusing, and it's something that maybe you wish you never went down. But at least with riding the Griffin, you can go to at least one point and then figure it out from there. And that has such a deep meaning. And if you get to something that has real evidence and knowledge, you can really just carry on. Like, Tartaria was a place. It's been documented over and over again. We know these massive buildings, were heated some way, thanks to that the Dan Holohan guy, and there's a lot of other guys who do great work into it about how they could have heated these massive rooms and all of these metal plates and the walls and the floors, and it really, everything added up, and it's hard to get that type of tech back if someone of today doesn't fully understand it. Maybe you can figure it out and maybe get it going again, but is it going to be at the same efficiency it was once at? Or, it's definitely interesting that we have all of this, kind of really old tech available that should be really repurposed, put back into modern societies. But I guess that would be too easy, and to be too easy of a life for people. And
I don't believe any of it's been lost. It's all been squirreled away into warehouses, and we saw it all at the World Fair. And then they put it away somewhere underground. It's gone. I think just for anyone that's new to Tartaria, it might be worth explaining to them about the griffin. The griffin is the flag for part of the Tartarian Empire, and it was mirrored with a lot of other animals that were presented in black on flags. So if you're still bearing an animal in your flag, it may well have come from the Tartarian Empire at some point.
And the griffin, to remind everyone, it's made up of what is it make?
So there's two different styles of griffin. There's the lion and the eagle, which is a very distinctive type of griffin. Looks like the Welsh dragon in effect. And then you had a different type of griffin, which was a chicken and a dog. They both symbolized a similar. Both griffins symbolize something similar, which is the if we look at the dog and the chicken sort of thing, the dog is an animal of endurance and strength, same as the lion, bravery, if you like, to run in, and the chicken or the eagle, chicken, but a cockerel is one of the most vicious animals on the planet. Fearless, will fight to the death, regardless of injury, regardless of anything else. You just put two cockerels in the same space, and this will happen, as many around the world still used for betting and things like that. But yeah, so those two combined meant that sort of never give up attitude, backed with strength and bravery, if you like. So it was why it was embodied as an emblem.
It sounds like it's a good representation to have. But it's also interesting that when the Rus came in, wasn't it with the spear? They were killing the griffin on the horse, wasn't it?
Exactly right. And see, that leads on to quite an interesting thing, which is the legend of St. George. He was spearing the dragon or the griffin in some depictions, and whether it was George, it's a very similar sort of thing. And is that a little nod to those in the know of bringing down the empire? The last nail in the coffin of it's always questions I sort of I wonder. But yeah, it's very interesting, some of the depictions you find. We went for the white griffin. We were trying to bring the griffin back into the light. So that's the whole purpose of why we've got it as the logo. But it still meant never giving up, trying to bring the history back. So
because you have those t-shirts on your site, right? Yeah, you sent me one as well, and it's brilliant. Fits perfect. Thanks a million, mate.
Well, that's all right, mate. They're pretty hard wearing as well, so that's why I like them. So, but yeah, so the griffin was an important part. But I think, like, even if we look at as you go back, if you use Tartaria as this key to start unlocking the past, some of the animals that you find in the past are fantastic. You've got the griffins, you've got the dragons.
Yes,
I don't know about you. I mean, between the pair of us with our two channels, we must see just about everything. And I've not seen any deep historical mentions of dinosaurs, and yet I'm flooded with dragons. They're in everything I look at. Every book, there's a little motif of a dragon somewhere, or dragons seem to very much a thing. But I can't find, you know, any sort of reference to the dinosaurs in history. So I find that quite interesting. That you know.
So yeah, so I think I would be on a similar page in that respect. Yeah, I get a lot of these so-called dinosaurs they're finding are you know, possibly old dragons. But also I do think there were some large reptiles, but the whole dinosaur story, majority of it is made up. Like 90% of it is made up. They're able to create these bones in the museums. They have a place set up creating them.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite interesting. I think that yeah, a lot of these bones they're finding were they coming from dragons? Were they coming from giants, titans, possibly? And then I guess, you know, I guess having to say it now on the whole dinosaur thing is, you know, where it all originated from, and how they used it for the fossil fuel industry, you know. Hold on, I'm just going to get my note. I had a note on that there. You can cut this bit out. Oh yeah. So, so oil was actually a residue from deceased living matter, and well, this is their
This is what
theory.
we're told. Yeah.
Yes,
carbohydrate. Yeah.
Yes, basically where fossil fuels come from. But the problem with that theory is that 16,000 feet is the lowest that any fossil has ever been found. And anybody can research this now if they wanted to. But the deepest we've actually ever drilled for oil is 40,000 feet. And not once after the depth of 16,000 feet down, because they've drilled 20,000, 25, 30,000. They've done loads of different depths. But of all those depths, they've never actually come across any fossil remains. And there should be. If this is where oil comes from, then you should have fossil remains to find with that. But they can't find any. Which basically proves it doesn't actually come from deceased living matter. It's probably more likely that the Earth produces it itself. And the reason they did that basically was to control the market and see oil as a limited resource we had. So then they were able to just, you know, push the idea that, you know, it's coming from living matter, you know, deceased living matter. So there can only be so much of it left. So we have to get all as we can now, you know. But there are oil fields they've, you know, emptied in Russia and they're refilled again. So, you know, the story about that is definitely very different than what we've been told. But you're right. And I definitely think a lot of these bones they're finding are just coming from, you know, dragons, you know, or giants, basically. So
I agree 100%. I mean, I remember breaking it to my young ones that the dinosaur bones in the Natural History Museum in the UK, they're not real. They are manufactured bones.
Yeah.
And
yes.
I, when I was younger, I challenged the staff on it. I said, well, where's the dinosaur? And they said, well, it's too precious to have on display, which is a great argument.
Yeah.
In a, you know, temperature controlled environment and all the rest of it. I had visions of a glass box with the dinosaur in it. I thought, well, why don't they just bring that box out and put it there for me to actually see? Why am I seeing plastic that look really real? But it's with the oil thing, you know.
But that's not something obvious unless you went in and asked that question, Mig.
You just assume it's the real thing.
You would have, right? Yeah. You would have just assumed.
Well, I then found out that there's no real dinosaur bone on display anywhere in the world because they're too precious and they have to be kept at the temperature. But then it sort of makes you question, what are we actually looking at? You know, because if I'm not able to see an original and all the rest of it, I'm looking at a theatrical show in effect. But but yeah, so that yeah, there are the questions on the dinos, and definitely on the whole fossil fuel, fossil side of things. I mean, when I was younger growing up, I remember the Texan oil fields were about to run out. The Arab ones were going. There was, a fine night of oil, which again, as you say, it allows people to maintain a price on something. It's pretty much with apples, Apple production in the UK. They'll throw so many of them away to keep the Apple price at a certain level, because if there's too much abundance, the price could be affected. Um, and I think that's the same with everything in the realm at the moment, is that if you buy an orange or an apple, you plant that and you get 6 or 7 trees out of one apple. Everything here is free and in abundance if it's cultivated in the right way and respected in the right way. And I think the old world have very much had that ethos down to a T. You see some of the Starfort structures and how they've built things going out, and they have all of these sort of the gardens that would have been functioning for the environments and that sort of stuff. And nowadays it's very much making everything into this finite commodity we're going to lose. And oil's just, it's just the red flag for everyone, because these oil fields didn't run out of oil. We're still pumping oil at an incredible rate. They're still having to suppress barrels to keep the price up. So it definitely doesn't come from dinosaurs. I read somewhere once that the most abundant substance on the planet was water, and the second most abundant was oil.
Yes,
and
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, as you said, it's in great abundance. Yeah, so it's funny because if they go, if they they were going with that theory that was running out, but they're still getting it, then then they're pushing the idea that there was a lot more dinosaurs than we thought there was.
You just found another herd that got slaughtered.
Yeah. Look at all these raptors down here. Such a vicious death.
Yeah, I mean, there's questions that but everything you look at has some sort of question. But the dinosaur story, I just keep on that one, because when I first researched that, and it's going back a long time ago, I didn't make any notes on it, but from what I gathered, and people can do their own research and tell me how wrong I am on remembering this, but there was basically 2 guys who were joined to this club in England back in the 1800s. And the first dinosaur they found was a tooth, a very large tooth, that, as we know, could have belonged to many different things that have come from the past. So the first dinosaur was actually called the Toothosaurus. And they made up what they thought this thing looked like based
just
upon
from
this
that
tooth.
one tooth. Yeah.
Whether the tooth was genuine or not, I'm assuming it was. But like I said to people in the past, if you look at a rabbit, the skeleton of a rabbit, you'd think it was the most ferocious animal that's ever walked the planet. I mean, that is one scary skeleton of an animal. And yet once you put all the fluffy bunny stuff on it, it looks completely different, So, but they went off and they did this world exploration for dinosaurs, and they came back with like 1,000 between them, 1,000 different dinosaurs that they'd found. And it turned out that they were all fakes, other than 1 or 2 bones that couldn't be registered. But it was sort of interesting because this became a very big industry. There was many shows and the traveling circuses that sort of jumped on the back of this, and whether it was a bit of foolhardy rivalry between 2 guys that got out of hand and now is so big that you couldn't stop it. But it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, dinosaurs, and you couldn't break it to any film studio that they potentially weren't what we were told. But there's a question mark over dinosaurs, definitely, and the more you look into it, the shadier it gets.
So do you think it was more like nearly like a cult was made, and they've come up with these designs, they've agreed upon them, and then that's what they've gone with, and they've run with that, and they've got these so-called scientific establishment minds to agree upon it and then sell it?
Well, I think there's definitely there's definitely bones found in this realm that are fantastic, of creatures of the past and people of the past, and a lot of those bones aren't presented to us in the right way. I'm not saying that anybody that works in the dinosaur industry or the displays of dinosaurs is in any way purposely trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, but it's interesting how you need a permit to discover a dinosaur, and there generally are areas you can go and discover a dinosaur. Utah has one, and there's many different ones around the world, and that's an interesting aspect of it. And it also interests that we as a channel, we go through a lot of old articles and old newspaper reports and that sort of stuff, and the amount of references to giants I can find, of Joe Blogs finding a giant in a cave somewhere or in his back garden, and it being a newspaper report. I don't see that same level of reporting on dinosaur fossils, which
Yeah, of course, yeah.
which I find quite interesting. It's also interesting how many reports you find on giants.
But also, isn't it so interesting how normalized it was? It was just, oh, another giant found. It was
Absolutely.
just totally normalized in the 1800s. And then that's when I was saying before, they started doing these hoaxes.
Yeah.
And they just threw everything out. And then most people, if you did come across it, you're not going to tell anyone because you're going to be, outcasted and say, oh, but don't you know, they're all hoaxes now. One guy found them and it was a hoax, so all the previous ones are too. But it definitely seemed that it didn't even seem that it was a big deal for people. It was just accepted. It was accepted. It was larger people, and we're finding their bones. It's being docked. Yeah. We understand. We accept all that. And then within the space of 50, 100 years, it's demonized, then forgotten about, and now we're here today, Mig and Larry, looking at it again.
I find the giant thing for me fascinates me because it's not beyond my realms of understanding. It's that I've met a lot of big people. I'm not a short guy myself, and I mean,
you're quite a tall guy.
Yeah. So, and I went to Iceland, and I wasn't even up to people's breasts, if you like. They were that much bigger than me. So there are still giants walking around among us every single day in terms of large stature people, and certainly some of the buildings seem to lend to people that were much taller than we are today. If you just look at window placement in a lot of buildings, and windows are normally a tell that you want a window to be sort of functional in a building, or accessible, or at least you can look at it. And in a lot of buildings, I know some of it's to trick the light. They seem to have been built for someone far greater in stature than we are. And the doors, I think, are you can't get away from some of these doors. They're so big, so vast, and the handles from them are halfway up out of reach of a normal human being. So I think there's a hell of a lot of argument to say that giants definitely existed, but the mainstream will tell you you're crazy for thinking that, but crazy for questioning dinosaurs.
Well, what do you? Yeah, they existed, and I agree with you there. But what do you think? Was it as a separate people, or were we the giants once in the past? Have we just got smaller over time, or what do you think has happened?
Yeah, I think there's. I think, like all things, elephants included, I think everything started a bit bigger, and through time things tend to get smaller. And you found that on all animals around our kingdom. You can find that there's a big ancient version of it and a very small recent version of it. And I think we're no different. We've been systematically getting smaller through the cycles of existence, if you like. And but I do think there were crossover points. because when you go back through artwork, documentation, there are many references to these two sort of cultures coming into each other. You can go back to the biblical references and Book of Enoch and lots of other things like that, which will give you, sort of one version of it. But you can also go through each different culture, and there is a reference somewhere to a giant. I know in Ireland, you've got more than your fair share of old giant legends, and I mean in England, everybody knows the fee fi fo fum story, and definitely an Englishman they were after. So
yes, delicious blood,
making bread from the bones, which I didn't know was a thing, but yeah, apparently. So you've got all these references throughout history for giants, and you've got these stories, you've got all this sort of what's now mythology, but I think there's far more truth in it. Personally, I'm someone with an open mind on everything, so my mind is very open to the possibility of there being giants. And I think I've seen quite a lot of evidence to suggest that they've left their mark physically, and a mark on us as well, in terms of maybe what was passed on from them and that sort of stuff. There's a lot of Renaissance art that shows people that were far bigger than other people in the pictures, and you're sort of, well, was that just the artist making a boo-boo, or was that person generally twice the size of that guy? But it all seems quite normal, and everyone's intermingling as well.
Yes, yeah, that's so true. It's like the articles like that, it seems to be accepted, but it's in for it to be in every single culture in the world. It's how would that be possible then? And then to throw it then all into the myth basket, with certain nations not being in contact for so long, but yet they have the similar stories of giants. But it's definitely interesting. Like what you were saying about the windows and the doors. In some buildings I've been in where the bottom of the window will be like here on me, and it's like,
why have you done that? Why? Yeah.
And the same with the doors. Yes, you do see big doors, but then there's big doors, and they've got the locks. You have to be, reaching up to 6.5 foot to get them or higher, and or sometimes they'll use big sticks to get at it. So it just doesn't. A lot of it doesn't seem practical for people of our size today, but I'm sure it was if we were much larger, or there was much larger people back then.
Well, there's the door thing's always great, because there's a lot of arguments to say, some doors were designed for people on horseback, but then there's doors that handles even go beyond that. And it's like, well,
right.
Were they riding two horses? Why? So I think, yeah.
No, they were riding elephants, maybe.
Yeah, riding elephant, maybe. Yeah. So this is the wonderful thing. There's always a sort of narrative that can go over anything you discover. There'll be a narrative, and it's if you Google something, you can stop there and go home because it's giving you an answer. But the more you plow into literally any subjects of history, you'll find an alternative. You'll find a new avenue, and a lot of the physical remains of things, they speak for themselves. You can't argue with, where the windows are set, where the doors are. I think as well, I mean, for me, being a Londoner, it's clear that this place has been mud flooded. You can't avoid it. Most of our buildings have got these ground floors with windows and doors in them, and all the rest of it. And it seems as you go down in these buildings, the roof level gets taller and taller, the more you sort of discover. So I don't know if the original builders of everything knew that we'd get smaller, and these buildings would get covered up and be repurposed over time, and where we're actually living.
Or why would they have windows looking into brick walls, or going down there? What?
I can't find any decent narrative to explain why they would have done what they've done, and how they would have done it. 'Cause we're moving into
Also, you were showing me before you had come across it, because you're involved in the construction a bit yourself, like you were saying, was how thick the brick walls were, and how hard that is to manage even today. I don't know how many bricks thick you said it was.
what we did we went through a wall recently that was 10 bricks thick.
Wow.
And I mean, whatever argument or reasoning or just to put bricks in a configuration where they all lock together over that length is quite an intricate task. I mean, just binding two walls and this isn't a wall. These weren't cavitied. They were a pure brick structure. I mean,
and very wedged together solidly.
Yeah, solidly. And I mean, even the mortar on some of these buildings, it's just non-existent. I mean, there is a mortar in there. You can see there's some lime, basically. The mortar was different.
Right.
They used like a lime mortar, which goes harder over time and is something that I think people are starting to reintroduce into building now. Some of the older stuff that was actually better, and a lot of the new materials we're using just do not cut it. And but yeah, I suppose we're moving into the mudflood territory, but if you look at
I kind of sidetracked you there.
No. The same thing is so. If you look at these buildings, when we're told, so if you look at most of the London stuff, a lot of it was built during the 1800s. The Victorians built it. End of story, basically. And we just have to accept that the Victorians were just so good at everything that they were able to build full sewage systems, an entire city almost. They were able to forecast for the types of roads that we'd need with cars and all the rest of it in terms of the sizing and what they've done and the planning and all the rest of it is quite incredible. And yet, when you start uncovering some of these buildings, what is ground level is actually the first floor. It could be the first floor or more, but we will know it's the first floor because below it will be a basement. It will have windows looking out either into a small dig out that people have done post this mud flood, or it will just be looking at a brick wall and mud. And a lot of them you uncover where they've been boarded over and bits of wood and plasterboard have been put over them, and you sort of pull it back and there's a window frame there. And why would you do it? And things, if you're using a horse and cart, the amount of groundworks you'd have to do, the amount of soil that would have to be moved to build the building, because you're going to have to move 10 foot of soil to put the ground floor in the ground. Then you've got to go down further for your footings, your drainage, if you're going to have drainage, which some of the buildings do have drainage, but not for toilet systems, which is always very, very bizarre. That will be below that point again. So to do this in modern days, I wouldn't argue. We've got trucks and we've got tractor JCBs and that sort of stuff. But how the narrative is explained to us that this was guys with horse and cart and a bucket and a trowel, there's just no way that you could build an entire city with one floor under. The most logical explanation is that there was a mud flood. There's been many of them, I think, and there's certain innovations that people come up with post these mud floods to keep things going, like vault lights, which are the little bits of glass you see in the street. That were designed to bounce light from the street level down into the floor that's now been lost to the ground. And interestingly, some of those buildings had vault lights in the basement floors.
Wow.
I don't know what that says, but it's is interesting that you're bouncing light. And again, the generation before us, they were the masters of light, how they could bounce light into a building. And a lot of that's been lost by modern renovations. We go in, we start repurposing buildings, we take buildings and chop them up into flats and all the rest of it. And then they become dark and dingy without really appreciating how that building was initially designed and how much light it would have absorbed. But they're definitely they've all sunk 10 feet, or there was quite a serious mud flood that certainly hit London, certainly hit San Fran, certainly hit most of the major capitals around the world. And a lot of these buildings and architecture have been dug out afterwards. I think most of America has been dug out if you look at it.
Yeah, I'd agree, and the same in a lot of places in Russia too, and Moscow and St. Petersburg and that. But it's I think, the mud floods, they definitely occurred. Like, I don't think it was, one mud flood at, one time and it happened everywhere. No, there were many different mud floods at different times in different regions all over. So, when was the last mud flood? It depends on the region and where it was. But like you're saying, it's so obvious on a lot of buildings, and then some of them look so top heavy. I think there's many of them. I think there's one, the Basilica in Ecuador.
Yeah,
It looks crazy top
yeah,
heavy.
yeah.
But also there's even loads of other ones. Like this one actually doesn't look particularly top heavy, but there's a museum in Leipzig, and there's an old artwork of it back in the 1500s or sometime, and it's got at least two more levels to it than what we see today, like going deeper down. So this, and that's happened everywhere. So these buildings are clearly a lot older than what they've been telling us as well, and they've blatantly covered up for it.
Yes, yeah, but that's where you start to see there's been a blatant cover up.
Yeah.
It is in the buildings, and when you start to uncover, I mean, even the Capitol building in DC, we've recently published an article on it. It's got columns and windows and everything else. There's a layer below what you see today. What the question I have is how much is down there? Some of the buildings that I look at in London, they've been built with these vaulted domes that effectively could take any force. Once you could bury some of these big structures with as much dirt as you want, the vault, but the dome, the arch structures below will just take it. So when you've got these big churches that have got these huge bell towers that come up, if there were these cyclical mud floods, then eventually all that'd be left is the little bell tower. But that would still give you access to quite a substantial underground cavern now, which would be the old building. How much is still down there? How much is revealed? I mean, certainly in London, there's 1,000 disused train stations that are underground, never being used again. But so I think there's layers and layers below us, and I'm not suggesting that it was all Tartarian. Some of it could have been well before. It seems to be that we've been building cultures on top of cultures and buildings on top of buildings, and it seems to be that this is only theory, never really done any research or work on it, but it seems to be that the original structures that were built on some sort of firm foundation, and there's always an express intent to build the new building on one that existed before, especially with temples and things like that. Now you can look at the religious significance, but you'd also look at
it's like that. There's like that one. Is it in Baalbek? If it's attributed to a Roman site, but the foundation stones, they're gigantic.
The trialathon or something, and they called the something like that. They're 3 stones that just unfathomably big.
But they're still attributed to the Romans because they built on top of it, basically, and yeah.
It's buildings on top of buildings, and and repurposes of buildings, and whomever built this architecture and all around us, it certainly wasn't our culture. It certainly didn't come from our mindset as we know it now. It was something that predated us, and we're in a lot of cases I want to say rediscovered, but maybe it's been reintroduced, a lot of the technologies and things like that, and we end up living in these structures and in these cities and patting ourselves on the back for our great achievement, when really we've just repurposed something not as well as it was used the first time, if that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah, well, to whether to get its original purpose back, is another hard task. But like you said, it's not saying everything was Tartaria or uh, as we're speaking about the mud floods and how much the landscape has changed and all these. You can even go to maps. There's loads and loads of maps in the 1500s, and the Sahara, not 5,000 years ago, in the 1500s, the Sahara, it's completely different than what it
There's
was
little
today.
buildings in it. Yeah, I've seen those.
There's well-established cities there. There's rivers, lush forests. They have it all, and that's from multiple different cartographers who have who've put their maps out there showing this. So the
Not sure
timeline
if
is definitely
this one, the one we were looking at before, the 1544. If you have a look on it, I think we'll probably go up. But look, if you can see here, there's that's 1544. Now that structure there, unless the artist has been very generous, is pretty much the size of a mountain, and it's a vaulted domed building, and you can go back on map after map. And again, here, look, so we're looking at another one there that's clearly a little town, with a very tall building in it, cathedral style. So these towns and cities and buildings and structures have been there a long time, some longer than others, and you can see the style changes between some of the buildings are built up sort of just solid rocks that have been put together, and they've made fantastic structures. And then you move into the red brick period, which, I mean, there's a lot of red brick that's been used around the world at the same time, and buildings you don't even think are built out red brick. A lot of the churches and cathedrals they cover the masonry up in all sorts of stuff, but it's still red brick.
It is funny that you mentioned that, because I've looked into that there, like before, I think in America and in England, and you look at, say, you'll take into account maybe of all the buildings that they've done this year in this place, or red brick or whatever, and then you go and find out where they manufacture red bricks, and you see how many did they manufacture a year, and then you'll find out, wait, the numbers ain't adding up.
Well, I know in London at one point there were so many brick foundries. They were churning out bricks at an incredible rate. There was this period of time when there was actually, I think there was a law passed that you couldn't make your own bricks in your own back garden because a lot of London sat on clay. So a lot of people, but still, when you look, I mean, there were thousands of bricks created, but when you start looking at just some of these buildings, how many, I think that chat AI, whatever it was, you can ask it sort of what the approximate number of bricks would be in the building, and and then you start looking at outputs, and you start thinking, that's them sewing up for 5 years for that building. Where do they get the bricks for this one?
Exactly, yeah. And as you said, it wasn't one brick wall. Like, many of these have 10 bricks or so. Like, there's a serious amount compared to today.
They get thicker as you go down, and they also have these sort of balustrades or these reinforcements on the side, which almost would have allowed for side impact into the building. And there's so much stuff going on. And then, I mean, then you could move on to the other style of building, which was the starfolts. Who built those, and where did they come from? I don't think I think you have to go back further than Tartarian to find how those buildings came around, because they're called, sorry, for those that don't know, a star fault is also called a bastion fault, and they are faults the shape of stars that you find globally. You find them on islands in the middle of the Pacific. England's got hundreds of them. France is peppered with them. Ireland has them. America is full of them.
Isn't the Statue of Liberty on a little star fort or something?
Sits on a star fault, yeah, on a mini star fault. But again, if you find a mini star fault, that tends to mean a lot of the times it was all stars. So they would build a big star, and it was ornated with little stars that would be structures. And I always wonder, sometimes you see these small star faults that look a little bit out of place because most of the time they're city size, and you think, is that all that we can still see above the ground? How much of that star fault sort of exists underneath? How far down do they go? Who built them? It's a lot of questions just on the star fault side of things, the bastion faults, because they don't make any sense from a defensive point of view if you were going to attack them, which I think a lot of people cover on YouTube and that sort of stuff. But more importantly, how did they get the materials to build these things? Why would they go to so much effort to build these things? And we've done a lot of articles on the different star faults. They've been buried. There's another layer of star fault that you can find in all the old depictions that isn't there now. They're all now just surface level with structures built on top of them. But these things, I think they go a lot further down, and who built those is still a huge question mark.
Yeah, they've always really interested me, and also even one more than that is some of those islands they've created. And you look at them from an aerial view, and they're well done, they're well aligned, they're right angles, it just doesn't make sense in that era. And and even they do create some man-made islands today, even, but they're not structurally, have straight lines and all of this that we've seen. I think there's some in America I've seen before, and they say they were man-made, and they say, oh, that was made in the late 1800s and this and that, but it doesn't add up. That's even harder to do. But yeah, there's too many feats that just still seem like nearly impossible today that they managed very easily back then. You know?
So when I think of these things, I come from it with an understanding that there was technology in the past, and even if you were just going to take your steam power, there was a steam-powered crane called Gigantus that they built years ago, and nothing has ever really compared to it since. And they built, I think, Sunderland Pier or a pier up in the north of England by just dropping these huge, monolithic style blocks into the sea, sort of thing. So I look at the past and think, well, we did have tech and rest of it. But if you go on the modern narratives where things like Tartaria don't exist, giants don't exist, but then you're also on the side of it, you're told that, well, everything was built by horse and cart, and just the amount of men it would take to tend the horses to move the earths doesn't make sense. You'd need a whole encampment of people just looking after horses.
Yes, that's so true. That is so true, and it goes the same with a lot of those, the world fairs that they've created, and some of them in a very short amount of time, only a couple of years. Yet they have perfect channels, like dug out, like you said, the manpower, even just to take away all of that rubble and dirt, would take forever. And it's not one building. They're saying they built the whole thing. And it's the same story.
It was just built out of bits of wood, and we chucked some plaster on it. It's mainly just tin foil, it's cardboard and sticky tape. But when you actually look at the pictures of some of these buildings that have now been leveled, I mean, White City was the one in London, and it's now a hellhole area. It's nothing glamorous about it anymore. But back in the day, it was a pure white marble style city with the columns. It had rivers going through it. You could take a gondola ride around it and all this sort of stuff. And and some of these structures from the old fairs are still there. They weren't all knocked down. There are still remnants of the fairs that exist, the buildings.
But some of those buildings are still there. They said in the past that some of those were wooden plaster. They've done well to stand the test of time to today, haven't they?
They've done, and some of them had fires as well, which but
it's always very interesting that you see that. You did a great article on it on your channel. You did one with the White House as well, and the lower level. And even I came across one today. I seen one of the admin channel dystopian. I can't remember his name, the certain last name he had, but he shared a great picture as well. And it was, one of these buildings and down in the bottom level, and they had one date of like established, and it was like 1903. And then there was another date in the background, and it said 1803. And I don't believe either of the dates. I think they were just figure out which one we're going to go with, and that was it.
This is an interesting joke we sometimes have at work. Is the founding of things. I mean, I don't know any building term which is founding. Yes, you do foundations, and you can put a foundation stone in or whatever, but you still build it. You still construct it. You still make it. The fact that many of these buildings have a founding date always sort of makes me laugh. Or maybe they were just found on that date.
That's hilarious.
They're not lying. They're just saying, well,
they're being honest.
They're being honest.
Yeah.
They're saying we found this building. It's bloody fantastic, but we're going to attribute it to this guy, Cyril, whatever your name is. What do you do, Cyril? You're a baker. Well, you can also design buildings like this, Cyril. And you look at you look at some of the narratives to some of the buildings, and it's like, sorry, who designed it? And I think there's one guy I was looking at the other day. He built like 40 of these massive churches, and also you look at his career. He was in banking, and you're like, well, okay, yes, he could have been the financier, but he's documented as the architect. And it's like, well, that's a hobby, he should probably think about quitting work and doing that full time,
Yet no photos probably exist of him. I've found with others in similar things where they've put all their wealth nearly or all their time into doing these things within a space of, say, bang 5 years, and we're going to bang all these cathedrals out or get all these buildings going, and then that's it, and that's their like achievement or whatever they want to phrase it as. But it still just gets accepted by the masses, and this guy would be treated as a great man and respected, and they'll honor him every year. But as you said, he just found it. He didn't build it.
If any of these characters are even real, as I go through history, some of even characters they use are sort of sketchy and questionable, and the number of buildings that were attributed to them, and where they were found, and I think if it was the case that there was an event that culled us back as humanity, and we were out there again digging stuff out and refounding it and all the rest of it, and just laying claim to it, I think that seems much more true as a narrative. But then how do you kick off a property market without people owning things? The minute you found it, you have an ownership to it, especially if you've said someone's built it and all the rest of it. And then effectively that building belongs to somebody. It's creating wealth for someone straight away. And I think, that a lot of what's happened throughout history is that things have been found. The common people don't realize sometimes as well that things have been found. If they're being reintroduced into an area, and they arrive, and you say, well, that's Peter's building, that's Paul's building, and that sort of stuff, then everybody just cracks on and goes with it. I mean, if you think of some of these cities that were repopulated, orphan trains and all these other things where people are being shipped around the realm to repopulate these buildings. But I do, because carrying on a little bit, but because we live in modern times and we have things like AI now, it does make me question the narrative even more, because it wouldn't be beyond the realms of feasibility now for AI to write as much history as it wanted to about us or about any narrative, and give it 2 or 3 generations. That new information that's just been written could be the legacy that you would think goes back thousands of years. So I think the tech is available now to completely rewrite history. Is this the first time that tech's been available? If we find these buildings that have been found, how far back does human ingenuity go, and how nefariously has it been used against us? That's just me sort of saying out there that it's as you go through some of these historical references, like on the social media, you get these bots that have these suspect names that don't quite look, I don't know why, you just get the feel that they're not genuine names. And as you go through history, you get this same sort of feel of like, well, that's an interesting, 4 different Smiths have built churches in Louisiana when they all lived in London,
and they were all brothers.
They're all brothers, and and also the companies is really interesting, because as you and I both know, to build something big, there's a lot of people involved to get that project going, and you need a company, a business, some sort of front to it. And some of them, there isn't a business, or that you can't find the builders, or it's this suspect same bunch of names that keep coming up. And it's I'm sure we could do
the same legitimate companies, or the limited companies start popping up, and it is fascinating, it really is. One thing I was thinking about there was what was interesting, we were talking about it as well, speaking of losing all of this kind of tech in a way, was the massive palaces. You brought it up as well. You made a funny comment on it, was about the toilets and all of these things. And, yet they can plumb the hell out of any fountain they want. It's and like not just basic, like this is well done. It's not simple, but yet they weren't able to do any toilets. What's your take on that?
See, so that takes you down the realms of a whole new thing. I think, first of all, a great example of that is Versailles. The Palace of Versailles was built with a toilet. There is one working toilet built into the palace, but that's it. And it had, forgive me if I'm wrong, I think it's like 1,400 rooms or many rooms. And if you've got that many rooms, and in a lot of cases, if we look at London as a great example, we've got Victorian sewage systems that have been there from the Victorian days, and they're still the systems we're using to service London today, and they were extensive, and yet the houses that were built by the Victorians supposedly weren't built with toilets. So you would the house was built as a house, and then as an afterthought, there was a toilet built onto the outside of the house, which most people of the certain age will remember at some point a freezing night in the outside toilet sort of thing, especially in London. And then it's only sort of more in the recent times, the 20s and the 30s, these toilets and bathrooms were brought in the house. But interestingly, they've directly linked into a sewer system that already existed. So if you were able to build the house and the sewage system, why wouldn't you build the toilet? Unless the people at some point had different requirements. And there's you can go back and you can find stories of a people called the Brethren, where they weren't consuming food in the same manner that we do today. Food was much more of a luxury and a taste sort of thing. They seemed to gather the power they needed to run their body from other sources. And that, it may have been the environment. Maybe they had a magical elixir drink or something.
Because that would seem, I don't know. Well, it would seem more plausible. It seems pretty ridiculous to think that they would have all that knowledge and they would, go all to that planning and design and do all of this, and then afterwards you're like, oh, damn it, the toilet.
Put one in, they won't notice.
yeah. So, I think I resonate with that. What you're saying, I think maybe before 500 years ago, it was a bit more like that. Were we able to harness the ether, and that was some sort of sustenance for us, that or even just in connection with frequencies. I think maybe we've become so disconnected that we have to consume all the time. because we're in such a low vibrational field, I guess, in comparison to I guess we were in a higher vibrational field in the past, and now we're in a really low one. And that's why we can't see beyond the veil anymore. I think I was telling you about before with that, the Irish witch, or they called her a witch or healer, Biddy Early, and she talked about how she felt that the incoming radio, that all those frequencies were going to disconnect us and we won't be able to see beyond the veil anymore. And that meant seeing the little people, seeing the fairies and all of that sort of thing. So not just seeing that, but actually having a connection and being able to pull back actual knowledge. Maybe that's where the real source of knowledge is coming from, when we're actually fully connected. We just, we're able to get it from there, and that, design these things to benefit us. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I remember seeing a chart. It went through when different frequencies have been introduced into the environment, whether it be radio frequency, television, and going forth, and what outbreaks and issues humanity's had straight afterwards.
Exactly.
Again, you could say it's coincidence, but there's a strong correlation between a new frequency coming in and a brand new illness that will sweep through the population, and then the population recovers from. Now, we're pretty tough and durable beings. I think we can withstand quite a lot, but who knows what we've lost in advancing. And I think beyond think, I think I'm getting to a point of understanding that in the past they understood frequencies, they could use frequencies to their advantage, whether it was to power a building, or whether it would be to charge a person, if you like.
Yes.
And to heal people. And it's something that modern science now looks at with frequency healing. And there's a guy the other day or recently that could play a particular frequency to cancerous cells, and they would start breaking up in front of him. Japanese scientists, I think. So I think this understanding of frequency, and that we are frequency beings, we're far more related to this frequency than we like to think. And again, I think in the past it's been able to be used for good, although I think part of the demise potentially of the old world was using some of this tech against
us. And dude, that's probably why they took all the bells out as well. How much of an acoustic resonance of healing or health do you think they could benefit people?
Well, I think frequency in medical terms will become the key of the future. You won't. I mean, we've gone from invasive surgeries into keyhole surgeries, and now they're looking at frequency based surgery. I mean, you've got to imagine what a frequency is. I mean, radiotherapy is a frequency. All of these things, that we're already using frequencies in some forms of medicine. I think our understanding of it's getting better. I think some of the previous civilizations or people that came before had a very, very good understanding of how it worked. But like anything, the difference between through frequencies could be quite extreme. Unless you know what you're doing, if you play the wrong one, you could end up hurting someone, irreparably. You play the right one, and they'll be fine. I think the experiments they do with water show all the time how responsive water is to even musical notes, let alone any sort of hidden frequencies out of our spectrum. And you can see the results, the difference between the thing that I think everybody would be aware of, the difference between 440 hertz and 432 hertz on impact on water. And we're a being that's made of a lot of water, a lot more water than any other thing. We're a high percentage of water. So if that frequency is going to affect our the substance we're made of, then it's definitely going to have a spin-on effect on us. But I think it is a two-way street. The bells you've brought up, that's fascinating. The bells are fascinating. London was known for its bells, the bells of London, and you know, some of these buildings were built to house bells. I was looking into Cologne.
Sorry, I interrupt you there.
Yeah.
It's quite funny and interesting. When I was living in London, there was a place down the road from me, and it was an old bell tower. And they had given the tower, they given over to a World War One vet. There's no history about the tower. There's no nothing. It's just that. So like, it's amazing that they can just give that to somebody. It's just strange stuff like that they're giving away.
Yeah.
And it had a serious purpose, like you said in the past. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Well, no, I mean the bells. I think had the thing about a lot of the stuff from the old world, whether it be Tartarian or old world, and I think Tartaria is the sort of the doorway into the old world. So everything had many functions. So you'd have a bell and you play it just because it sounded nice. At the same time, it would produce a frequency that would align your body. And I think bells and chanting and things like that are still used all around the world in different.
That has to be the same reason why they removed all the organs from the churches as well. It has
Why is
to
it
be
called an organ?
Exactly.
The organs, yeah. I mean, again, a lot of these buildings were built around the organs, and the organs. I mean, why don't nobody play these anymore? It's very rarely you hear them. I've heard a few played, but it's not the type of music that can be played on it. It's always the low frequency stuff that they're playing. You don't get the full hit of what the organs can do. Organs, in my opinion, from the research I've done, certainly had a beneficial impact on human beings.
There's some places, I think there's one in France, or there are some around where they have them still left, and you talk about people going in there and they have this sense of bliss and just well-being, and basically because of these frequencies, and like you brought up, like the chants and these different things. There was one video I shared before with the Chinese monks, and there were 3 of them chanting on a woman's tumor, and
yes, that's fantastic.
And it disappeared. But that's also like, they have to be in the right frequency linked together, and the chanting is important, and there has to be a vibe with it. And once they decide on what the chant is for and what it's going to do, it has that effect. If one of them, was thinking differently, the chant probably wouldn't have the same effect. But the chants are in every tribe; they're all around, from distant past. To be running around in circles and chanting and all of these things. So, are they just producing these frequencies for their own well-being, or what do you think?
Well, I think so one of my favorite composers is a lady called Hilda von Bingen. She is a fantastic character. She was a turn of she's around 1000 in modern Gregorian dates, was a woman who produced music, and it was sort of along the lines of Gregorian chant type music, or it's not music that you can initially listen to as music. But once you get your head around what you're listening to, it's fantastic sound. But this was a composer back in 1000 AD that was producing music with the purpose of healing a person. Wow. That was the person, and she was if ever you want to research her, fantastic character, because we're told that these women were such a segregated thing in the past, but she created her own language. She wrote more music than any of her contemporaries at the time. She was veneered, respected, and everybody knew of her. The church at the time obviously had their issues with her, but she was seen as she was almost given saint status because of the music she produced. It had to have been from God, so they couldn't even argue. But she was quite outspoken, and you know, it's quite an interesting little bit of history. And you find these really prominent figures in history, and a lot of them I find are female figures that you sort of think, oh, what? How do you even? Yeah, I thought you were, you know, this subjugated, you know, part of humanity, when actually no, you know, we've got all these prominent figures. But she was writing music to Hill. So it was clearly something that was in people's mindset. It was in their intentions. And I think, you know, there is definitely an effect on human beings from frequency. How much we could use that to our advantage, I don't know. The bells, even, just going back to them, they could have had a very different purpose as well in terms of power creation. And I think a lot of people overlook how significant a bell ringing can be. But if a very simple example is, if I was to ring a bell in one room, and I had an exact same bell, and you know this as well as I do, just for those that maybe don't know this, that you had another exact same bell somewhere else, and I ring this bell, as long as they are within distance that sound wave will travel, the other bell will ring without having to touch it. It will just start vibrating at the same frequency as this. So if you've got a huge bell in a church and you bang it, how many little bells are going to start ringing all around it? You know, and how could you use that? Could you use your little bell to power something? You know, and that's a very rudimentary example of how that technology could be used to potentially create power or create resonance that can be used elsewhere. Again, as well,
or even creating a massive resonant field for a whole town or city or whatever, isn't it?
Well, we know static electricity lives in the atmosphere, and there's plenty of it. And I think you know, for every 1 meter you go off the ground, it goes up by 100 volts. And by the time you get up to cloud level, you're dealing with, you know, 33,000 odd volts up there, and you see the expression of that in lightning. You get two clouds rubbed together, which is water vapor and that sort of thing. So if you were able to excite the air enough through vibration, then what sort of power could you draw from that? If you had
unlimited, I'd imagine, wouldn't it?
I think there's a famous bell in Manamar. Was it you that posted that recently? The bell in Manamar. It was the largest bell ever discovered. Europeans came in and stole it effectively, and the boat sank because it was so big. But it's in that area where you've got all of those buildings with the conical, it's thousands of little buildings with all sort of these conical, Oriental style spires, and then the original picture, I think, was that bell sat behind them all. And God knows how you rang it, but what happened to this lot when you did?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and I'm sort of becoming more and more in the opinion that we don't understand electricity as well as we think. I got a this is my little electrical handbook, and it's the Audley's Handbook of Electricity, and this is a book from the 1800s. And the first thing they have in this book is the states of electricity. And the thing that struck me there was, I understand static electricity, I understand dynamic, I understand magnetism. I didn't know radiation was a type of electricity.
I didn't know that either.
No, but then when I think about it, I think, well, radiation, radio, you know. And it's when I started thinking about it, and obviously there's radium and all these other things. It's like, oh, hang on a minute, it's so again, it's frequency. It's you know, we're coming back into that realm of we had a greater understanding in the past than we have now, and you know, what I think we have a very blinkered view on what's possible, what's not possible, and anybody that looks outside of it nowadays, that, well, they lose their funding. or they're just trashed by the masses. But I think there's a the frequency in sound is such a key part to our past, and one that has not just been hidden from us, but has been purposefully taken away. And the frequencies we live at now, I think, are harmful in every manner we could imagine. I think even the frequency coming out of my screen at the moment is probably damaging me in some way, and yet had I have gone back in time, it probably would have been beneficial to me. I probably would have got a suntan at the end of it or something, you know.
That's it. That's it. It does seem like that's the way, definitely. And the further you go back, the more in touch they were with all of these things and frequency and healing and everything. And the more they understood it, to be able to use it as a power source, to be able to do whatever they wanted with it. You can manipulate pretty much anything with frequency. So yeah, it definitely has its effects for sure.
I was going to say, did you ever see that? It was one of these cars that guys make with the big sound systems in them, and these.
And the everything is moving.
The metal's fluid, so it's like.
But then it takes its previous shape once he's stopped. Like, it's amazing how that while it's going like that, bending so quickly, that if you just kill the sound, could that not just get stuck in that bend?
See, this is the thing, is that but it doesn't. It always goes back to its state. But could you manipulate it to just bend it?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing, is we're going to go right off topic now, but the Horns of Jericho.
No, it's on topic.
Yeah, it's on topic. The Horns of Jericho. When I was at school, we used to sing this song, and also it just goes over your head. You don't think about it. But then they brought down the walls of Jericho with trumpets.
Yes.
Why is no one talking about that? You know,
what? So true. Yeah.
Why are we building tanks?
Yeah.
And there was the
imagine if the North Koreans secretly, that's what their weapons are. They have just massive trumpets.
But I mean, they were. I mean, and again, you produce a low enough frequency, you can break things. You produce a high enough frequency. Good opera singers will be able to smash glasses, during the break. Because so sorry, we're going slightly off topic, but yeah, I mean, but you hear it. Sound,
you hear it in many things. Even do you ever hear that one, that the Icelandic chant? Where all the crowd comes together and they do a chant, and they can do a clap as well.
Yeah,
but it's powerful. It's so powerful. I should share. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's amazing what when you do gather a number of people, and if they're getting the frequency right, it's very powerful.
And I think there was some monks that could move rocks. That they would all get together and they would make this. But it was interesting, that story, when I read into that they had basically sort of an arrangement of people that were making different sounds and doing different things, but the rock wouldn't rise immediately. It took some time until this frequency was bedded in enough, and then all of a sudden it would pop off the ground and levitate. And sound levitation is something we can still produce today. You get some polystyrene and put it over your speaker. It won't sit on the speaker. It will sit in the vibration above it. So how much what did we have that mastered in the past, and have we lost that? Because that seems to be the greatest thing we've lost from antiquity, is the understanding of just how critical sound is.
Definitely, I couldn't agree more. I think you really laid that out really well, mate. But
yes, I suppose in closing, we could keep going for hours on any of those subjects. I'm sure, but we've run out of battery and time and all sorts. But it's been a pleasure.
I agree.
I've got to just throw it out there because we haven't mentioned it the whole way we're going through this podcast. For anyone that doesn't know, Larry runs the Tartaria History Channel on Telegram, and also has Heisting History on Rumble and just about every other platform, well worth checking out. So I just sort of mentioned that in case anyone, I think we mentioned that at the beginning, so
appreciate
just
that,
want to
mate.
throw it
Thank you.
out there. Which
No, but
happens,
as you said, we could go on and on for for hours and hours, you know. And I think we definitely need to do more of these podcasts. They're great.
definitely up for it. And well, if people like what we've said, then it might be worth doing some more of it and exploring some stuff. But yeah, Larry, always a pleasure.
You too, Mig.
We've now committed one to video, so as we said we should have done. So yeah, been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, mate.
No worries.
Imagine if we lost all that recording.
Mate, that's why I want to stop it now. Don't say that.